AI you're using today is going to look elementary compared to what we will ultimately be using 5, 10 years down the road for sure. And AI is already better than doctors.
Trump seems to be floating here of consolidate Fannie, Freddie, put them out on the open stock market again, to kind of release them from conservatorship in some way.
The U.S. has $45 trillion in liabilities. Fannie and Freddie combined are about $9 trillion in loans that are counted as liabilities. Episode 54 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Uninteresting guys talking about interesting times. Jeff, it's really good to be back today with you. We don't have a guest this week, and there's been a lot going on that I'm glad we get a chance to talk about here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was tempted, Mark, to jump in and cut you off and steal the intro, but I think I would have forgotten our tagline at this point, just to highlight how uninteresting we are. I can't even keep that straight. But yeah, it's been a little bit busy. It was fun to get together and see each other in person, although I don't know if this was totally an intentional decision or just a reality that sometimes going to conferences has a way of wearing you out, but it's almost easier to record not being together in person than it is stretching our limited production abilities to try to set up cameras and audio and all of that stuff to sound halfway decent in the same room. But good to connect.
Maybe the summit. I was talking to Hal Humphreys at Val Expo, and we had planned to do something maybe at the Val Expo. Talked about it, didn't happen, but maybe at the summit soon enough we can do something there. It feels so much more natural to be recording in the same location that we're in, but we're just not set up for that. So everyone is stuck with you and I for this episode because our show schedulers and producers are slacking, which are also us. And we're busy doing some other things here. So a nice reprieve, though, because there is a lot going on both within the industry and in the market that we haven't had a chance to talk about much here. So I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know that I'm excited to see the numbers of views that we'll get when it's just you and us, you and me, and not having somebody interesting here to drive people or give them a reason to listen to us. But it is fun to get back and touch on some of the stuff that we're seeing, observations, not the least of which coming out of, the Valuation Expo, where people are trying to gear up for changes that are ahead.
You bet. There are a lot, Jeff, and I think the best advice is to not look at the views. I think you and I do a pretty good job of that. Maybe once we get to 100th episode, we'll take a look there. But been an enjoyable journey. Look forward to keeping running on it. And part of what makes that journey so enjoyable is heading out to these conferences and getting to meet folks that always surprise us that are listening. And I don't ever expect that those kind of encounters to happen when we go, but it's so nice to be able to talk about topics. It's a way to connect with people in a way that I really appreciate, Jeff. There's so many folks out there that I don't ever get to talk to, but this is a way to tee up a topic. You and I will end up discussing it, or maybe with a guest, somewhat in depth, but a lot of folks will come in those encounters where we get to meet across a trade show floor or wherever, and have some thoughts on their mind about the topics that we discussed. And so we can kind of jump in to a meaningful discussion on something instead of, hey, when'd you get in? When are you leaving? And all of these things that are the small talk that I'm not really good at anyway.
Well, I don't think either one of us are, particularly exceptional at that. But that's exactly right. And one of the podcasts that we, our favorite one, probably the All In, one of the contributors there has talked about, David Freeberg's made the comment more than once that, when you walk in a room, people, if they have reason to find or listen to you, already have a sense of kind of who you are, at least your perspective on things generally. And I think to your point, it allows you to kind of get to maybe a more in-depth conversation more quickly than just the kind of the small talk. I did have an interesting story I have to tell you, Mark. At the Val Expo, we are far from like famous and overwhelming as far as that goes. But it does, to your point, surprise me a little bit when somebody comes up that recognizes, one of us from what we're doing here. And I had a chance encounter in the restroom with somebody who was complimenting the podcast. And so I just said hi. I knew who they were, but we weren't, like, we didn't know each other real well or anything. And, sometimes you meet in maybe awkward or not like the trade show floor area necessarily, but it was just interesting. I said hi, recognized him, and not expecting it all. Hey, really appreciate the podcast. So, Mike, appreciate the shout out. We'll test and see if you're actually listening or not to these, or just know that we making an attempt here at doing this. But yeah, it really is fun to connect with people, and better or worse, agree with us, disagree with us, whatever. At least you kind of have a perspective on how we see the world as we try to analyze and digest all of the many different things going on around us.
Well, Jeff, I think that's a good intro into some observations that we had at Val Expo, which are not about the conference itself necessarily, but kind of what's being discussed and what's top of mind with everyone here. And we have a little meme that we put together that I think best summarizes Val Expo. And for those of you that are listening by audio, it is the 3-clip meme of the urinal where one person is relieving themselves and someone walks all the way across to sit right next to or stand right next to the other person in there with the following caption of "I'm ready for UAD 3.6. Are you?" And so forcing this conversation in every conversation. And Jeff, it's almost like this is the damn small talk that goes on even in this conference, is this UAD thing. And, I think I do think that it's a bit of a testament to the communication and even over communication from the GSEs on what's coming. I think it's really good. In fact, I was talking to one of the folks from one of the GSEs who was saying, man, someone in our group was saying, I feel like I've answered the same question 1,000 times. And I think that's the point, is that, let's make sure that we're communicating to software vendors, to lenders, to appraisers and the like. But I think there are some important takeaways for, specifically for the people that don't attend these conferences or don't attend the things that, where these people are present to kind of spread the message of what's coming and what's happening. And, I was not at CRN, which is a great event. I was not there. UAD 3.6 was the center of that meeting from what I could tell. And so as someone that wasn't there, I have all these connections that I have on social media that were there and saying, hey, I'm getting ready for 3.6, and are you kind of thing. And well, no, I'm not at that conference. I'm not getting ready for it, I guess, in the same way the most prepared are. And so it can create a bit of, I don't know if fear is the right word, but maybe it is the right word. We got big change coming. I think that the average appraiser certainly has not done very much about it at this point. And am I way behind? What do you feel as it relates to that, Jeff?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mark. And maybe to zoom out for just a second, UAD 3.6 is a uniform appraisal data set. It's the way that appraisals are written and communicated, primarily driven by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, that ingest all of this appraisal data and then use it in making, risk analysis and in deciding whether they're willing to buy certain loans and that sort of a thing. And so, from a high level, it's going to change the way that an appraisal looks. Lenders, realtors, borrowers, certainly appraisers, but anybody who gets a residential appraisal that's generated for a loan origination are going to be looking at a different type of a report than what they've been used to seeing for a really long time. Now, it's not happening tomorrow, even though in a limited pilot, it's going to start next month. But it's been dominating the conversation in the appraisal space, and I think in the lending space for a long time. The funny, maybe not so funny, but dirty little secret of to that meme is that nobody's ready for 3.6 like today as it stands. I mean, there's a rush or kind of a sprint to get over the finish line. One of the representatives from the GSEs that we were talking to was saying, man, we just need the first software provider to make it available, get it in the hands of appraisers to kind of put pressure on everybody else to get over the finish line. They're getting close. It's going to be released soon. I think by most providers, but it's probably going to be kind of a scaled down, stripped down version of what you do initially. But, one of the lenders that I had been hearing was wanting to, really hit it right out of the gates, is even talking about pumping the brakes, because as much as they want to be a leader in the clubhouse, they also, even more so, can't afford to have everything come to a grinding halt as far as processing and closing loans, and so there has to be a certain level of readiness to make that happen. And so it's coming. It's going to be here. I'm actually looking forward to some conversations. I think we're starting or trying to tee up with some guests that will be able to share some kind of deeper perspective about what this is going to mean for other users, for users of appraisals, and not just the appraisers themselves that are worried about how to, write these reports. But it's a pretty monumental change. I think it has the potential to change the landscape of market share for software providers in the space. One of the things that was interesting, you and I both noted at the conference, was there are new software providers popping up that haven't been in the space for a really long time. There are ancillary service providers popping up. A lot of it, kind of combining this new way of writing an appraisal report with an artificial intelligence integration or solution as part of that. There's a lot more change and transition right now, not just with how the report's going to look, but the way you're going to get to that, with a lot of the software and tech solutions that are out there. And, I suspect that, you'll have some new companies that emerge as picking up some significant market share. It's just an opportunity for, a little bit of a redistribution of, what's kind of been the standing paradigm for the last, several generations, I think.
Jeff, in fact, we were talking to some folks with Total in the Totality, and saying, look, it is going to disrupt your processes. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And those coming from folks that are designing the new system, so they certainly would know. It's going to matter. It makes a difference, and take my advice with a grain of salt. It's probably worth how much you've paid for it here on this podcast, but I give the appraiser permission to not have done much of anything as it relates to UAD 3.6 over the last 6+ months. Maybe a little bit of familiarity of the type of change that's coming, but there isn't software to get your hands on yet, and there won't be for another 3-4 weeks, I think, in the very beginning. But this September release is, as you said, pilot, kind of invitation only, as I understand. I think a lot of people could receive the invitation if they just asked for it, but that's lenders and appraisal management companies that would be asking for that permission. Some certainly have, but I think we're probably talking about number of orders delivered in the tens or low hundreds from September to December. December is a broad release where I don't think invitation is needed at all. And then that begins, a little bit more of an expansion of running some things through the system. But even then, we are probably talking in the hundreds or low thousands nationally of orders running through this way. And then correct me if I'm wrong here, Jeff, but I think late next year is when the mandatory requirement for the switch is there. So I think they've left us with a very slow ramp that picks up speed as we're going into the middle of next year. And good, when it's time to jump in, it's time to jump in head first for all of us, for sure. And so, I think as you were talking about, we are getting hit with headlines and content creators that are, I think this is a really big opportunity for a lot of software providers. It's certainly seen as a big opportunity for software providers that maybe aren't the market share leaders in whether it's a report writer or tools for this, inspections or filling out the report, kind of data moving or adjustment support, all these sorts of things. And so I think some say, well, hey, here is my chance to become a major player in the market. And so they're really pushing this transition right now because it makes a lot of sense within their business plan to do that. And I think it's notable, Jeff, that a lot of those folks, a lot that we're presenting at Val Expo have release dates of December. And I think that is talking about the real broad release date is the most meaningful for the average market participant in this. So I see it there. That is how I see it. It could be wrong, but I see it that way.
No, I read it the same way, and I'm going to define a friend of the podcast as somebody who's come on the podcast and still talks to us after the experience. So one of those friends of the podcast, Sean Telford, a really good friend,
Yeah.
but he had a really good way of, I think, summarizing what you're talking about, Mark. He said, you come to these conferences and there's usually not a lot of like major revelations of things you don't know, but you gain a little bit deeper understanding or context or nuance around what's happening. And so in a conversation you and I were having with another, what I'll characterize as friend of the podcast, with Lyle Radke, who's come on and talked with us and will still talk with us. So I'm taking that as a good sign. But I'm not going to say this is what he said, but my takeaway from the conversation was this limited production or kind of an invitation only pilot that they're starting in September, is by design not going to be high volume so that they can work out the bugs, see if there are kinks, understand what's not working before they kind of overwhelm the system with too much volume coming through. So, my read is exactly as you've laid it out. It's not going to be a massive amount of volume that are going to be written in this new format and trying to be ingested and then, finalized and closed, in September and October and November. Right? It'll be a bit of a gradual ramp up, I'm guessing. But it's just, I was before this conference anticipating there are going to be quite a few people, a number of lenders I'm doing work with right now that are going to want the reports written in this way. Coming out of the conference, I think they're going to be fewer, fewer like that are ready themselves to go. And even, I'd be surprised if there were any that totally flipped a switch and said everything we order from an appraiser is going to be in this new reporting format. I think even the lenders themselves are going to be, kind of dipping a toe in the water to make sure that their systems are working before they go full bore, which is not what a few have been signaling or messaging, that they wanted to come hot out of the gate. And I don't think that's going to be the reality that we see.
Yeah, you bet, Jeff. I think, these changes really do make a change. And what's one thing that is notable to me is the ongoing transformation of the inspection as it relates to the appraisal. We've had hybrids kind of introduced and become more popular here in COVID. We've got, a major part of these new forms is creating ultimate flexibility in how and who helps get an appraisal done, and there was no flexibility. There is no flexibility in the 1004 hard-coded certifications as it exists, or very little. And so there's, a lot of that flexibility comes to clearly stated participation of whoever in the process. And then it's up to the lender and the order of the appraisal to do whatever they would like to do. So maybe it's to keep it the same as it has been, but even in the amount of data collected, it's a lot. It's a lot more than the appraiser has traditionally done. And there's a lot of tools that are expanding on some of the structure being added even to the measuring process. I was impressed by a number of different options tackling one of the most difficult things to train, which is measuring a house. I think the skill set required to perform an appraisal analysis is often quite different from the skill set that is required to measure a house. There's a lot of spatial awareness that can be complicated for people. And Kubi, Casa, and others have been out there, really making, kind of adding structure to this. But there have been some limitations, as I've seen it, to that process. And others are coming out as sort of a 2.0 and trying to solve that. And it's interesting, and I think the inspection is taking a new shape one way or another. Whether I like it or not, I don't really know. I think I can see a world where the appraiser is not central to the inspection, in a form of a hybrid or something like that. But I could see that. There are other countries that do that, principally. But it's just all changing quite a bit. And I have no idea how and where it all is going to land. But these tools will take us into a discussion of the presence of artificial intelligence as an idea, a concept, a tool that was present at this conference. Those things are they're meaningful in the changes that are coming.
Well, and they're converging, I mean, it's this change in the report, which is forcing change in the software. We've got this backdrop of artificial intelligence finding its way in, and especially with some of the new service providers, saying, hey, it's a strategic advantage for us can be to build, whether it's a report writer or a data collection tool or whatever, with artificial intelligence solutions, like natively designed to be in it, as opposed to a legacy provider that has to find a way to insert that into the system that they already have. So, one or two of the last takeaways I had there, Mark, were one, it's kind of fun to see some revitalization in terms of technology companies wanting to try to find new or maybe enhanced solutions. No, I don't, that's not to say that every new, solution provided is going to be the right one or the best one or whatever. But, there were names I hadn't seen before that were there talking about their products, which was, kind of fun to see. It was exciting to see. Part of, what that leads into is, one of the other takeaways is, it's not today, but I think there's a future where at a minimum appraisers aren't likely to be measuring homes in the way that they have forever, whether it's a will, a tape measure, a laser. I think the technology is getting to a place where it's going to provide some better standardization. I know I see, appraisers in social media that say, if I can't inspect the property, if I don't physically measure it, I can't possibly appraise it, which is fine, and outside of lending space, there may be some more legacy minded appraisers that just keep doing what they're doing, for different users. And that's totally fine. I think that the world's changing, and like it, hate it, whatever. I think one of the themes of the podcast has been markets are dynamic and you can adapt or you can die or you can, probably not have a whole lot of middle ground at some point. But it's not what it was 30 years ago, and good, bad, or any different. I think understanding what the market wants from the services you provide and finding a way to responsibly meet that need is the call to anybody trying to provide a service or a product in a market that's competitive.
Well, Jeff, the buggy whip maker, people still appreciate a good custom buggy whip. Maybe not many, but some do. People still appreciate the art of sort of lassoing a cow, while riding a horse. It might even pay to watch that take place. One of the one of the only skills that I have is measuring a house, and it deeply saddens me because I don't see a world where someone is going to pay to watch me do that, nor pay for that ability in some sort of custom or artsy display. So it's sad for me to see this taking place.
I do wonder, Mark, and I will confess I'm only familiar with OnlyFans by reputation. I've never even been on the site, but I do wonder if there's room for this niche, like watch me measure a house kind of a fan group, because I'd be really surprised if that one existed out there in the moment. I can't verify whether it does or not, but maybe there's hope for you, Mark.
Well, I have not yet thought of a genre that would sell well on OnlyFans here, Jeff. So maybe that is it. Not really looking for a reason to get on there, but that's funny. That's funny. So while we were at this conference in Las Vegas, another conference was going on. Well, a whole bunch of them were going on, but one of them was something called AI4, which I'm guessing means, I don't know if it does, but I think it's maybe the fourth conference. But it is an artificial intelligence conference, and as best I can tell, it is a broad covering of the topic, a very large conference where it feeds off into a whole bunch of different threads and pathways of where artificial intelligence is making impact. And so that was ongoing at the same time we're doing this. And I think just notable, I don't have a whole lot to say about that. There were a few folks that I knew of that were attending both, and it's just heady times. And, we talk about that a lot on here. I think one of the things most enjoyable to me was people taking kind of artificial intelligence outlooks or thoughts or ideas away from the podcast here and employing, one of which I think has been most notable is the voice to text, talking to your large language model as you would a friend. That seems to be really transformational to a lot of folks. It has been to me. I don't do it yet as much as I should, but it beyond comprehension creates a more interactive process or interface.
Yeah, it really does. And I'm going to call her a friend because she is, even though she hasn't been on the podcast. But Lori was somebody we were having a conversation with, and I think that was one of the revelations. Is she said, "Yeah, like I hadn't really thought about conversing with Chat GPT or whatever other model you're using, like in a friendly, conversive tone." I think she was talking about saying, like, telling it good morning and just talking as though it were more of a person, and getting comfortable and familiar with an interaction that way, leading to insights and perspectives that were just different than when I'm typing in this kind of legacy. I have a question, I'm going to type it into Google, and then I'm going to like click on the links to find the answers. And I had talked about this a little bit in the last time or two, I think, Mark. But one of the things I'm coming around to, I think, realizing is that artificial intelligence is a lot of things, but it seems to be a bit of a new paradigm for just compute and computation and how we interact with computers generally. And it hasn't totally displaced the legacy model. I mean, if you're going to go write an appraisal report or send an email, you're probably doing it in kind of a legacy way. But increasingly, I think the way that we interact with computers and computation is going to be more human-like and more natural than it has ever been with this, this keyboard that I have to like crank away at. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. And I think it's finding its way into a lot of everything that we do. And it's fun to see those that are embracing it and leaning in and excited to show you, hey, I found this new way of doing this thing. Roy Meyer, who was on recently with us, had a whole bunch of, just cool insights, and look forward to bringing him back, because he just kind of expanded my mind on just how to do certain things in ways I hadn't thought about, but are more natural and more human-like than any interaction I've had with a computer previously.
I think this doesn't matter to most people, and rightfully so. My analytical mind can just not get away from the oddity of how useful we as human beings find the outputs and the interactions with these large language models. From the standpoint of it being like a Google replacement, which is like, hey, instead of giving you the sources that can answer your question, go click on it, like aggregating those and giving it back. I certainly relate to that and understand how it gets there, but it's just fascinating to me that these language models are essentially next word guessers. They are not thinkers. It feels very much like they are thinkers to us, but they're not. In that we can find so much value in them being really good next word guessers. They're not contemplating the topic in the way that I think a human being contemplates a complicated topic. And I just have a hard, I don't even know why I'm bringing it up here, Jeff, other than it's like an oddity that I observe. And I think most humans could care less about that. It's just, what is the result? And I think I will get there. I think in daily use I am there, but it makes me wonder if there are limitations beyond what I consider on the surface.
I think it's a really good point. I'm glad you are bringing it up, Mark, because it's so easy to lose sight of what an LLM really is, which, as you've described, is this next word guesser. They've gotten very sophisticated, very helpful. Like you say, they provide information in that model of guessing the next word that's very helpful, insightful, and useful. I kind of wonder if this large language model processing isn't just like a first generation of artificial intelligence, and if there aren't other iterations that will come that are, maybe more in the line of the way that we reason and, get to conclusions as humans. It's been interesting to see the evolution. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that they were trained on a data set that was available on the internet up to a certain point. And it would just tell you, I'm not trained on anything current. I can't answer that question about current events and all of that sort of thing. Well, it didn't take that long for them to morph from a historical training data set to access to real-time information, on the internet live, which is what most of the queries, most of the things we want to know. I mean, we might be researching something from the past, but most of the stuff we need in our daily interactions are, current information, not 2 or 3 year old information. And so just like that has evolved fairly quickly. I wonder if there's some fundamental shift in the way that the reasoning takes place that isn't the next word guess or LLM model. And there will probably be multiple generations, but it feels like it's still kind of an advanced or a sophisticated aspect of this first generation that may fundamentally change in the near future.
We've heard the statement, I think we probably covered it here, that whatever language model or whatever AI you're using today is going to look elementary compared to what we will ultimately be using 5-10 years down the road, for sure. And my favorite quote, Elon Musk was talking just earlier this week or last, saying that AI is already better than doctors. And I'm guessing that this was in the diagnosis space. I don't know particularly, but that's what I guess. That's certainly my experience at this point, that they are really good at helping the layperson diagnose what they're dealing with or what some particular case. And it's like, look, it's already better than doctors and will be better at his own job, Elon Musk's job, than Elon is. And that's about the most subjective job that anybody has, just sort of overseeing all of these different entities. And so it's seeing profoundly how this is coming and where it's going. Yeah, it's interesting, Jeff. I don't know. I'm still amazed and still, at this point, I am hopeful to have artificial intelligence help me with a neighborhood description in an appraisal report. That's about as far as I'm getting.
Well, I do hope that it continues to work for us and not the other way around it, at some point. But I think in the near term, and I hope in the long term, it's going to be really good at, doing the medical job or whatever else, and that the professionals employ that to make them way better. There's still a lot of things that you want to have interactions with. On our recent podcast with John Downs, one of the takeaways for me from that conversation was human relationships and interactions still matter, whether it's the appraiser or certainly interacting with the borrower or buyer who is their client. I don't think those relationships are going to go away anytime soon. I think that AI can make us a lot better. And maybe the last takeaway that, from the conference was that I keep seeing situations where AI leads to the potential, if not realized yet, for productivity gains. It's not a total replacement, and then that's within coding, like writing software. You've still got to have the software engineer that that verifies or makes sure that the program is doing what it should, but they can do way more. I think that model applies to doctors, to appraisers, to a lot of professionals. That the day may come where the human element is not needed in whatever that transaction is, but I don't think that's anytime soon. I mean, I certainly hope that it's not, unless it just leads to such massive abundance everywhere that everybody's just out doing whatever they want without the need to work. But I'm not there yet as far as conceiving, that as a reality in the future.
Yeah, very good, Jeff. Yeah, well, we'll close that topic there. We've got queued up a single slide that I think is a nice transition, maybe from the conference and things are happening there, into the overall market. And it's just a report on brokerage growth, and that's real estate sales brokerage growth in 2024. And I thought this was a really interesting post, and it's highlighting that generally real estate sales is happening the same way. We've had some pretty major legislative conclusions and rule conclusions. I'm not entirely convinced that it's changed fundamentally how homes are bought and sold right at this point, and really has settled in on a big kind of scary thing, and I think more status quo from what I can tell. But what is really interesting about the sales volumes leaders is that they include at the very top Compass, EXP, Real Brokerage. Inside are four that are new service models that are leaders here and really hadn't sprung up until around 2018 or so. And so in less than 10 years, they have really taken the top. And what are they doing? They're doing the same thing that everybody else has been doing, but they're introducing some new models. Maybe it's from the corporate element or support or something different there, but it's new business models that are finding their way into I think aggregation probably of a lot of realtors that are out there through attractive brokerage models and fees and that sort of thing. But also tools that are helping folks at least see themselves as being able to participate more in the marketplace with that. So, in no doubt that all real estate services, we talked with John Downs last week on the lending side. We've got the brokers on the sales side here in major changes, and this sort of thing has been happening on the appraisal side for the last half decade or so, and continues to go on here with new models, at least thinking about how to serve the marketplace in ways that meet the modern demand.
Yeah, that's right. And what strikes me is, how relatively new and even in many cases unfamiliar some of these names are. But I think you're exactly right. It's this, evolution of the service that's being provided. And my read is the same as yours, Mark. I don't think that they're fundamentally shifting the nature of the role in the transaction, but they're certainly doing it in a way that is gaining a lot of traction. These aren't the traditional blue bloods as far as brokerage firms that you're used to seeing there, and it just, I think, speaks to what we're seeing on the appraisal side. You're seeing on the agency side. There are new opportunities, new service providers that are bringing something new that the market is seeming to recognize and value in the process. And it's really interesting to see the rate of growth, by these spread out here.
So Home Services of America, which I think is a bit more traditional, was 3 times larger than Compass in 2018. Now Compass is 1.7 times larger. So quite a difference. And in this last bullet point here is that by the end of 2024, the top 11 brokerages were a mix of business models, including luxury brands, 100% commission models, 100-year-old legacies, portal hybrids, and then cloud-based brokerages and more, right? So there's just a lot of things that are winning here, in a lot of ways to go in, including traditional, but including, new thoughtful ways to go about addressing the market. And I think this is probably a pretty good mirror of what has or will be happening within the appraisal space for sure.
I think that's exactly right. And as you talk through that, Mark, it occurs to me that in the market for residential real estate, you've got those from baby boomers, you got Gen X, you got Gen Y, you got millennials. You just got people that resonate with a different way of interacting, in a transaction. And I think that's reflected by, in that last bullet point you cited, the kind of the room for a whole bunch of different ways of facilitating that. You've got a whole bunch of different people at different stages in life and with different comfort levels with technology and the way they interact. Some people, still prefer to pick up the phone and have a conversation versus texting or doing anything else. And I think any of these models are designed to kind of accommodate what those expectations are.
You bet. Well, Jeff, a lot has been going on in the market, as is the Times here. And boy, we've been trying to digest it all. I'm not even sure what our next slide is suggesting here. The great folks from Collateral and Policy and UAD from the Fannie and Freddie are sort of have no idea, as best I can tell, what this post was or is that's on the screen here. But it is from our President Donald Trump. And it is him standing in front of the New York Stock Exchange. This is, as best I can tell, this is a image that he put on his social media account that says, I don't even know why this is it, but October of 2025, MAGA listed NYSE, the Great American Mortgage Corporation. He has noted an intention to push the Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship into privatization. How and when that would happen, I think, has not been said. And so this is just put out there. I don't know if it's just a weather balloon to be shot down. I don't know what it is, but I think that it is a idea put forth that privatization and the exiting of conservatorship would maybe put these two together in some way. Jeff, is that your read? I don't even know. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm lost trying to figure out what the acronym is going to be on this thing, Mark. GAMC. I mean, what the heck is that? You may as well, if you're going to make up a new name, you may as well have something that has a cool acronym, and that hasn't happened. I know. I think your read is right, Mark. That my guess is this is probably a weather balloon. Put it up, float it out there, and see what happens or what the response is. The thing that really comes to mind for me is the conversation I think that we had with Ed Pinto, although I might be giving him credit when somebody else made this observation, but I think it was him that had kind of suggested the opposite approach of what Trump seems to be floating here of consolidate Fannie Freddie, put them out on the open stock market again, to kind of release them from conservatorship in some way. The alternative suggestion to that was charter more organizations like Fannie and Freddie. So you've got a handful, more or less, or whatever, that are buyers in the secondary market to ensure liquidity within the market. That perspective was that you're not so wholly dependent on one or two organizations being successful and viable. It was the great financial crisis that caused the distress for Fannie and Freddie, which resulted in the government stepping in, because they do place a high priority on maintaining liquidity within the housing market so that people can buy and sell homes. There's financing to do that. It seems to me that having better diversification in terms of the number of companies that are operating in that space leads to better safety and soundness within the infrastructure than consolidating them into a single organization. I think the only way that you would consolidate this into a single entity and put it out there on the open stock market would be with an explicit guarantee or backstop from basically the taxpayer, but from the government, saying, hey, we're going to let these guys go out and operate, but if they do and they get into trouble, we're going to back them up so that the housing market and financial system doesn't totally crash. I actually had a bit of a conversation with Sean about this yesterday on a ride home, and I think what was interesting is we kind of talked through a little bit is if it were to go this way, and I'm far from convinced that this is how it's going to happen, consolidate them, release them from conservatorship, put them out there on the NYSE stock exchange. If that did happen and there is a specific guarantee or backstop, Mark, from the government, I think the incentive structure then is do as many deals as possible and don't worry as much about the risk, because they're ultimately they don't bear the risk of like going out of business or being shut down or bankruptcy. Whereas if if there isn't that guarantee, the risk, and I think just the internal decision making is different. Conversely, if you've got 5 or 6 companies, all of which are competing with each other and to stay alive and to stay viable, I think the decision making is different. Now, I think there would be an impact on rates. I think rates are probably lower if there's less risk with this government backstop. So in the short term, that's probably not a bad thing. But in the long term, as far as financial stability, I question whether this is like the safest and the smartest way to go forward.
I think a really big area to be focusing on, Jeff, is that government backstop and promise. The U.S. has $45 trillion in liabilities. Fannie and Freddie combined are about $9 trillion in loans that are counted as liabilities for the government here. Removing them is a 20% reduction in liabilities on the balance sheet for the U.S. And this, I think, is in keeping with the efforts to get the balance sheet and the P&L of the United States of America under control, according to this administration, and in all of them. But we see drastic steps being attempted here to try and get that under control. And so I think that 20% is enormously meaningful. And I do think that if there is a way for them to fully get these off the balance sheet, they're gonna explore that. But providing that backstop is not getting them off the balance sheet for sure. So so I think here we are, and it'll be really interesting to monitor how that's tackled.
Yeah, the other thing I remember Ed Pinto saying in our conversation with him is like, what's the value of the government guarantee or backstop? It's like it's priceless. It was just kind of harkening back to that Visa commercial of what's the price of whatever that's priceless, the experience. And I think that is true. It's really hard to quantify what a backstop is worth, and whether you have it or not. And then there's this discussion around, is it explicitly stated, in specific terms, or is it just implicit, meaning it's implied that, there's not a written out guarantee, but, everybody kind of knows that the government's not just going to let, this function within the financial system fall on its face and go away because of the ripple effects that would transpire. So I'm not getting too worried about it yet, but it was interesting that he put it out there, I'm sure to kind of garner, thoughts, discussion, debate around, is this the right path forward or not to meet the end?
Well, Jeff, this is probably really categorized as nothing more than a meme at this point, but memes capture, a lot of idea in one picture, and this has certainly done that. And the stock market seems to have responded, hitting a year-to-date high of 1190. I think we're sitting at 1125 or so today. So it's notable. It ain't over yet, right? Our predictions. By the way, not many people watch that one, so we might be able to change them, Jeff, as we get closer to the reveal at the end of the year. But you haven't won yet. You voted that it would be up over 10% from the time we recorded. It is, I think, today with this announcement. But let's see where we are at the end of the year.
Well, I was voting on the market moves trade here, Mark, hoping that we weren't totally off, although at the same time being incredibly worried about anybody actually believing us or taking any suggestions that we have as actual financial advice, because it's certainly not. But I just, at the time I made the prediction, I just felt like there's an appetite from the administration to try to do something, and if there's progress made, I do think that the price is going to continue to increase and reflect that. And it's certainly choppy as most stocks are, but it's definitely up to the right so far.
Well, Jeff, we've one thing since we've talked is we've gotten a lot of data that we've kind of been rooting for. Sadly, it's a little bit of grave dancing, I think. But all real estate professionals are, if they're aware of the different levers that will get us lower interest rates and a revived housing market, it is bad news, bad economic news, right? And so we've had a series of weak economic news. The one that moved the market the most was the jobs report from a couple of weeks ago now. The bond market treated that with respect. Not a lot else they have treated with respect, and lowered rates as a result of it. It was a very weak job market, but even more so, it was revisions of the past two jobs prints that came down enormously. Some, I don't remember now, let's say 270,000 new jobs off, something like that, down to, so from maybe roughly 270 down to like 30 or 40,000 jobs. So a big revision down. And so the weakening economy, we know that the Fed has said from the beginning, we either get inflation to 2% or the jobs market really takes a hit. We think the jobs market has been taking a hit from what we can see, but it's not been reflected in the jobs report numbers. And I'm certainly not saying that my own anecdotal observations should be right. I don't know. But we had the firing of the Bureau of Labor Statistics head there in a replacement with someone else. We'll go into that probably in another Market Moves episode. But the bad news, coupled with some other bad news we were needing. We got inventories pushing up to 1.5 million nationally, somewhere in that neighborhood. That's moving in a positive direction. I think it's that high. But certainly rising, and maybe making 2016 levels in some of the charts that I saw. But on the screen here, we also have kind of more ancillary data here, but it's same source sales and they're weakening. Kava, if you guys have eaten there, it's they bought Zoe's Kitchen. It's like a Mediterranean bowl, almost Chipotle, but Mediterranean. Same store sales down or only up. In the fourth quarter, they were up 21% quarter over quarter. Q1, they were only up 10.8% quarter over quarter. And then quarter two, only up 2.1%. So we went from 21 to 2.1. And then we have Chipotle now that for the second quarter in a row is had less same store sales. So a 4% drop from Q1 to Q2. And then lastly, Sweetgreen, another popular one, is also increasing the reduction in, so it's the rate of change. They're increasing the rate of change of same store sales, down 7.2% from last quarter to this. So we've talked about this at times with McDonald's and Starbucks and some of these other things, but I thought this was another data point of what I think is happening, and that is the United States consumer pulling back.
Yes, and this illustrates a lot of the different stories that I'm hearing out there of people pulling back. And most of these are a swing, of 9 or 10% or more from positive growth rate in the last quarter of 2024 to contracting or reduction, at least in the case of Chipotle and Sweetgreen, shrinking. I mean, selling less and less, increasing, at a increasing rate, as you said. And it feels right. And like you say, I mean, I don't know that I'm proud to be dancing on graves, but I also feel like it's, one of those things that we just need to not have, be in a roaring economy, given the concerns around interest rates, to facilitate interest rates, but given the concerns around inflation and unemployment. And so I think a lot of people are pulling back. We certainly haven't seen, wages increase at the rate that, that expenses and just living costs have. And I think this, one of many stories and instances I've seen, Mark, where people are just saying, hey, this, I'm not spending as much on things I don't have to as I was able to in the past. And, that's not a fun position to be in, but I think it does reflect, increasingly the reality.
You bet. You bet. Well, so interest rates, because of the jobs report, I think, are down at kind of year-long lows at 6.53% as I look today, and they've been hovering there. It's been nice to see, and hopefully a sign of things to come. People may be expecting that a rate cut could come as early as September, and maybe some questions about how big. And then yesterday or this morning, as we're recording this, we got slapped with the Producers Price Index. Instead of the CPI, we have the PPI, the Producers Price Index. And this is kind of like inflation for companies, the best way that I see it. And there was an expectation of a 2% increase, but we got a print of 0.9% increase, a lot more than what was expected. What does that tell us, Jeff?
Yeah. So, and just for clarification, the expectation was a 0.2% month over month increase. The reality was a 0.9% month over month increase. So, annualized, that's over 10% or thereabouts, if my math is any good on the fly. But just suggesting that the cost to companies, for producing has ticked up meaningfully in the last month. Now, is that then going to translate into the CPI and the Fed's other gauge, the PCE, I believe? I don't know. I think one of the main takeaways from the story where this article was posted was that, with the CPI coming in lower than expected, everybody was, doing their dance, their grave dance, saying, yes, we're going to get the Fed cutting rates this next cycle because this lower than expected inflation print is paving the way for that. This muddies the water a little bit in my mind, with the one data point, and I think there will be others before the Fed meets again and makes a decision, but one data point saying, hey, wait a minute, there may be some increasing price pressure in the market. This is on, I think you said it well, the company and the production side is not necessarily reflected in prices that the consumers are paying yet, but I would take it as, a potential leading indicator if this trend holds, Mark.
Reading a little bit about this print. First, I guess let's jump to the second graph that we have on this, which I think does, it's a pretty big print here, a big number, especially in the context of the last 2.5 years, because we really haven't seen this sort of number since COVID. And COVID was not a kind inflation series of prints. So I think it's notable. I think the Fed will be paying attention, and sadly, I think it gives the Fed some fodder to say, see, this is why we're hanging on here, because tariffs are going to have an impact. They are inflationary. One of the big contributors, surprisingly, to this was services. I think it represented something like 18 or 30% of the increase, service businesses, which I wouldn't think would be extra tied to tariffs. And the article that I was reading was saying, well, maybe the equipment used by those servicing companies. I don't know if that story adds up, and I really don't have a good explanation of why servicing is representative of such a big increase. But I do think that this is a sign where CPI is sort of holding steady, and surprisingly so to a lot of folks. And you hear the president saying, see, CPI's holding steady. Tariffs aren't doing at all what you're saying. It's just all gravy here. What this, I think, suggests is that companies are absorbing the tariff cost increases so far, not passing them on to consumers. But I don't think that would last very long, provided the tariffs last long.
I think you're right. And not just in this article, but in a lot of articles that I've been reading and seeing recently, it's that very exact scenario that you've laid out, Mark, where companies are absorbing much of the tariffs and trying to minimize any price increases to the end consumer out of fear of loss of market share in the moment. Whether that's sustainable, I don't know. We've had a number of trade deals finalized where at least an end tariff rate is known and then can be adjusted or accounted for, from the business's perspective. There are others, that are still in the works or trying to be negotiated, and China being the biggest one. In fact, I just saw that there was an extension, another 90-day extension on rates, tariffs pertaining to China while they continue to work. Trump's looking to get together with the Chinese president and all of that. But I think this is, and it could just be a single hot print. I mean, as you look at the chart here, we've had some months where not as high as this one at 0.9%, but there have been instances where you had one over 0.5%, followed by a drop of 0.25% or something. And so I don't think this necessarily confirms a trend, but I do think it certainly causes a little bit of pause with expectations for a short-term interest rate cut at the next Fed meeting.
I think the short of it is, Jeff, do not rely on interest rate reductions anytime soon, because they are totally unpredictable as each of these data points come out. So we'll keep cracking at it. We'll keep following it. And Jeff, that'll do it for this episode. Really good to bat around the observations from Val Expo in dealing with what's going on in the macroeconomic market.
Yeah, really was a lot of fun. I do confess I got a little distracted. I might have a couple of potential names for your OnlyFans account of you measuring homes, measurements with Mark, measuring Mark's measurements. I think we could have a little bit of fun with that, but.
Oh, please. Some of those, I don't think I like where that goes. So
I'm only worried about trying to drive viewership on some platform somewhere for you, Mark. Kidding, of course. I lost my train of thought for a minute early on when we were having that discussion. I thought, you could come up with something that would get people's attention, even if it wasn't attention in the way that you want it. So
yeah, this is true. Well, till next time, Jeff. Look forward to it. Talk to you soon.
Very good. See ya.